Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of what we are calling RCD Roundtable. Since this is episode 1, just a quick description about what we want this space to be. We know there are so many great district leaders, building leaders, classroom teachers, and support personnel that are doing the incredible work of implementing responsibility-centered discipline philosophies, strategies, and practices in their buildings. And what we really want to do is tap into that wealth of knowledge that exists all across the nation to help support you. As educators, we recognize that at times our best professional learning comes in those organic, informal periods in our day, whether we're grabbing a cup of coffee, maybe between passing periods or during lunchtime. And we really intend for this space to feel like that. And so going forward, we hope you have a chance to learn and ponder and feel supported by other individuals that are doing the same work that you're doing right now. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. His name is Jonathan Davis. Jonathan's got kind of an interesting story with responsibility-centered discipline, having implemented it in a previous school and then moving to a new school now and doing a lot of the same work. And so I'm going to step out of the way and have Jonathan introduce himself and give us just a quick back story of his connection to RCD, and then a little bit about the school that he is currently at, Dwight Englewood Middle School in Englewood, New Jersey. All right. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I didn't know I was guest number 1. That's very exciting. So when this hits it big and this becomes the new Tonight Show, I'll feel like I was the first guest.
Absolutely.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Davis. It is my 5th year at Dwight Englewood, which is an independent day school in northern New Jersey, just 10 minutes away from the George Washington Bridge, depending on traffic, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And as Kevin said, this is the second school I've run an RCD training at, and we're in our first year of giving them 5. We're in our second week of it at Dwight Englewood. But basically, my backstory is this. I was at an independent school in the Tampa Bay area in Florida, and I had been a dean of students and an assistant principal, and then I was coming into the principal's role, and I had several teachers who were always on my case because we weren't doing enough to kids. But I knew pretty clearly that marks and detentions and Saturday schools weren't the fix. And I know this because I saw the same kids over and over and over again. And all they were was angry that they were in detention. And I kept trying to get them to see their pattern. I kept trying to get them to get off the teacher's radar, and they weren't able to do it because they were angry that they were there. And so I told a group of teachers, look, I need help. I don't have the answers. I know this isn't working. And actually, I sent a dean and some teachers, some naysayers who were angry about me not doing enough, to a summer conference in Las Vegas, the National Conference on School Discipline. And they heard Larry Thompson speak, and they bought his book, and they came back and they showed me the YouTube video, and like, you need to read this book. And so I read the book, and a year later, I had a training at my school where I said, this is what we're all going to do. And I now know 8 years later, they're still doing it. And it doesn't solve every problem, but it allows you to come up with solutions for the problems where everyone knows what's going on. And it's a lot easier if everyone's rowing in the same direction. And so I switched schools. I moved up to New Jersey. And I realized that, again, I'm surrounded by really talented professionals who are committed educators. I'm in the middle school, and the people I work with are middle school teachers. So it's not like I have a bunch of people who wish they were in high school. No, they're all committed to being in middle school. But I realized, again, that we were really fractured in our approaches to classroom management, expectations for what happens when a kid goes to see the dean or is in a meeting with the principal. And we ran the whole gamut from the crime and punishment classroom to the really permissive. And so the goal once again, was to bring in RCD, read the book, Roadmap to Responsibility, and get people speaking the same language, having the same vocabulary, and approaching the problems in the same way. And here we are in week 2, and no one's rioted yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. That is extremely insightful. It's kind of interesting. You alluded to one of you felt like the needs for looking at classroom management differently was you had a lot of the same repeat offenders. You didn't really see growth in students. And then that fractured nature within your building of, like you said, everything from what we would call in training the big hammer classroom, more consequences, more policy, those things to kind of make kids hurt to change behavior. And then that more permissive kind of what we would say the heart approach. And so you alluded to some of those things. As far as staff, what was there kind of that need that you felt from staff that called for doing classroom management and discipline differently?
So I think, there's all the national organizations, whether it's ASCD or the AMLE for middle level education, they all talk about the importance of the teacher-student relationship. And I think teachers understand, because we all can think back to, Kevin, I've heard your story about thinking back to your high school experience and the relationship you had. And I think back, I don't remember what I learned specifically in a middle school class, but I remember the teachers who I thought knew me and the ones who didn't, who may not even cared about me. And it was a feeling. Who knows if they cared or not? And when talking with teachers, they're all frustrated because they're not getting what they want out of kids. And it's the approach of saying, like, what works best for kids? And how do you preserve, because the teacher would say, like, I let them walk all over me and I don't even know if they respect me anymore, but at least they're not a problem in my class. I'm like, well, that's not a great relationship. Or I gave them the strong teacher finger and popped down these consequences. And now they don't trust me when I'm trying to help them with their essay. And so it's getting everyone on board with what we're doing right now isn't making anyone happy. It's not, the inconsistencies among the adults, we're all unhappy with each other. The kids don't know, what classroom am I walking into? How do I need to code switch today? Coming from Mr. Roulhac's classroom into Mr. Davis's classroom, like oh shoot, that would have gotten me in trouble in the last period, but it's okay this period. It's really about creating an environment where you can actually create those relationships and there is a basis of trust and consistency. And so I really like that about RCD. And it also gets kids to grow, and it gets them less focused on being mad because I got in trouble, and more focused on how do I prevent this from happening in the future. And I actually, as a 12-year-old, have some control over my life and my experience.
Absolutely. And I think you pointed to something there about, a lot of times we say we're about relationships, but there's times where I think we're about relationships with just the good kids during the good times. And we need to be about relationships with everybody in the building. And I think you've probably seen it firsthand, and we see it as we go across the nation of a lot of times we just need a tool to do that. It's easy to do it when things are going well and kids are behaving and doing what's right. But when things aren't going so hot, having that tool, having that map for your brain to go to, having strategies to lean upon, I think you've seen play out in real life here, what that can do to the culture and climate of not only that classroom, but really your entire building.
And the tool even helps individual teachers not have that emotional response, which we then kick ourselves in the car ride home or the next morning when we're having cereal and we're still thinking about how we made it worse because we reacted. And I like how through practice, and it really helps you kind of shift the burden from me as the adult in the room to the kid. This is what they need to work on. And that's really important too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So once you found RCD, or once you had this group come back from the national conference, could you just talk through a little bit about, maybe even step 1A from, this sounds great. We'd love to have some on-site training, to getting some on-site training, and then what implementation began to look like in your building.
Yeah. So step one was pretty easy because obviously, teachers all know when there's something that's not working and they all have an opinion on it. And so in a faculty meeting, ours were, ironically, both my schools, our faculty meetings have been on Wednesdays after school. So if I go to another school, they better have a Wednesday one. So if it's Tuesday, I'll be late. But so just having them talk about what wasn't working and correctly identifying the big picture in a way that was not personalizing it. So talking about the inconsistencies, and everyone starts nodding their head. Because I'm not saying you're inconsistent, I'm saying the royal we, and that students were having the same repeat behaviors and no growth, and everyone starts nodding their head. And so we all can at least agree on that there is a problem. And I then said, the great news is there's a possible solution. And I said, but I don't know if it is the solution or not, leaving the question in place. And actually, quite honestly, Kevin, I encouraged my teachers to bring their best shot to the training. The ones who were like, I don't know if this really works, or this doesn't seem right to me. They were at my current school a little bit more all in. My previous school, I had a couple of people who were coming with, loaded for bear, and they thought that they were going to stump Larry. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if this works in a high school in a juvenile detention center, it's going to work at an independent school in the Tampa Bay area. But so everyone recognizing that this is something we need to work on. Check. I really found it helpful to have people read the book. It's not a thick book. You probably even could assign just a couple chapters or something, but the book helps people understand the philosophy. And the idea was, here's the book. I want you to read this book. I want you to mark it up. I want you to put your questions. I want you to, what's your disagreement? I used to be a history and English teacher. So it was almost like having the adults mark it up like we're marking up To Kill a Mockingbird in class or something. And then, going to the website, contacting Phyllis, getting it set up was actually the easiest part. And making sure that we set out the time that we needed. We got to clear out a full day, and some people were questioning like, oh, what if we end early? I'm like, we're not ending early. If we end early, it's because Kevin, it's like, we're at a good point, we're done. But blocking out that time and setting aside that time, and going through the training. And then we've already had, a training session at each grade level where we practiced. At our grade level team meeting last week, we each did a scenario that I gave them, and they practiced it. And it's setting up time to practice. I've heard several teachers talk about giving the kids 4, because it's the first week of school. And so let's build them up. Let's create that connection. Let's give them support. Let's recognize what they're doing in a positive way, so that when there is that breakdown later on, I've already done the support, the benefit, the closure, and so it feels more natural.
Absolutely.
That's our life cycle.
No, 100%. And I'm kind of thinking through. So we have some on-site training, and then now you got your staff all yourself. Yep. Did you identify, like you said, you guys have already done some practice. Did you lay out whether it be a practice schedule or maybe some type of leadership group or teacher leadership team to lean on, or maybe it was a group of your assistant principals or deans of students? Jonathan, maybe just allude to a little bit, kind of nuts and bolts, now that training's happened, kind of what was your next step as far as helping move towards implementation?
Oh, that's a great question. So at Dwight Englewood, we are a very grade level organized middle school. And so while we have history and art departments, we are also, everyone's an advisor at a grade level, and that they do a lot of meetings around that grade level. And so I actually have some 6th grade experts and 8th grade experts, et cetera. I have a dean for each grade, and then I have a team leader who's more of a curriculum focus. And so they have two different kinds of meetings. They have a dean's meeting, which is really focused on student concerns and issues, and then they have the grade level team meeting, which is more of a planning time. And so in both cases, the dean's meetings a couple of times a month, my deans know that they're going to at least talk through a scenario and make sure that they're practicing that way. And then the grade level teams, when they meet without the deans, they might actually bring up specific issues that are happening and do a role play in that scenario. But at least twice a month, my deans are going to be making a practice round, so to speak.
I think, sorry,
That's
go ahead.
the way.
I apologize for interrupting.
No, I was going to say, to me, that's the way to go. And the hardest part is actually practicing. There's a lawnmower going by. That's okay. That's middle school. It's the practice with the adults is actually harder and feels less natural than when you're actually talking with the kid. And so that's the barrier. I've heard a lot of teachers say, this doesn't feel natural. I'm like, well, it's a made up scenario and you're doing it with your best friend who teaches across the hall from you. Mm-hmm. It's not really real. But once you get it down and you remember the 5 steps, the only thing that matters is closure has to happen last. It becomes a lot easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, thinking about, there's always challenges with onboarding staff when it comes to implementing something new in a building or in your system. And so, you kind of have a unique experience where you've done it at one place and now you're doing it at another place. If you could just speak to a little bit challenges that you experienced with the onboarding process, and then how did you work through them, or how are you currently working through just some of those hurdles that naturally exist sometimes when we're shifting perspectives and implementing something new into a system?
Sure. Well, I'll say in terms of onboarding new concepts or new ideas, after the training, RCD is easier than some of the other big picture educational goals of like project-based learning. And it's easier because someone is going to say, I tried that with so-and-so the other day and it worked. And no one can say, well, that's because you're a history teacher. So this project-based learning is easy for you. I teach math. This is terrible. And so it spreads more quickly because it works. There are people who aren't good at it and will say, like, I know I should have RCD'd them, but I was so blah, 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 blah. And then I got on the Zoom with you and I don't remember where I put the copy of my book. So I can't just hold it up. But like on the covers of the book, it's the 6 exits. Mm-hmm. Like, don't give kids, this is where you can Photoshop in a cover of the book or something like that. Yeah. Like, then it becomes a conversation of like, why did you give the kid an opportunity to get out of like taking responsibility for it? Because I know you should have done the RCD. You know you should have done RCD, but instead you reacted this way or you did that. And now the kid, when I talk with them or the dean talks with them, it's going to be focused on you instead of them. Absolutely. And I really believe, because I work in a middle school, I know you used to work in a middle school. Middle schoolers are imperfect beings. And our ultimate goal is to plant seeds to make responsible adults. And so if all we're doing is planting seeds that take a long time to grow and we don't see the benefit of it, that's fine. So when a teacher does something that shortcuts the learning, whether it be in math or Spanish or in behavior, it's like, why would you do that? Because we're trying to get it so that the kid junior year in high school or at 25 or as a parent at 32 is doing it better. Like, give them the opportunity for growth. The other issue that people will say is this is going to take a long time. Mm-hmm. These conversations take a long time. And that is true. And so you either put in the work the first 6 weeks of school or you pay for it the last 3.5 months of school. And so I'm a saver. I'd rather max out my IRA when I was 25 and reap the compounding benefits and rewards later on than playing catch up. And so I think it is. When people say this is going to take a long time, I say absolutely. But if we do it together the first 2 months, the first 3 months this school year, next school year, we won't have to as much. And this spring, we will have less of the chronic problems. And that's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, and I just want to I thought that was all very well said, Jonathan. I appreciate your perspective. Um, just going back, you mentioned something really briefly about sometimes when staff maybe don't totally get through a give them five conversation, or maybe they trip up somewhere as we're growing skill. You said I have a context though to go back to have that conversation. And I think I have seen just myself in my own building, but all really across the nation, when you're having those conversations with a context and there's a shared language and a common language that you're using, those conversations are a lot easier as opposed to, the old way of doing things where we're just questioning each other's practices and there's inconsistencies and those types of things. And so just as a building leader, how has that impacted your life of working with staff, of having that common language and having a way that we're all speaking the same thing when we have to address sometimes when we don't do it so well in the classroom?
right. Well, so especially over the last 2.5 years, we've just been stretched to our limits. And I think teachers fairly believe like they're sometimes being forgotten. We've been focused on taking care of students, or we're taking care of parents who have to drop their kids off, and teachers get taken for granted. And so the one thing I like about instituting this program is every teacher in the middle school knows that I'm trying to do something that will help them out and make their professional life easier. And there are several moments in the training where you even bring up like, how many of you like wake up thinking about a kid or a specific class group of kids that you're having a hard time managing? And then how many times do those kids wake up thinking about you? And so the ultimate goal is to ease the burden for everyone. And so at least when I'm having that conversation with an adult who didn't do it quite the right way, there's at least like, this is here to make your life easier. And so that's why I'm trying to help you with it. And quite honestly, the goal of RCD is the same as my goal, which is growth and improvement. Carol Dweck mindsets, like, and so you didn't do it perfectly this time. Let's have a conversation about where the breakdown was and where the opportunity is and how do you fix it. And so it's not even a judgmental conversation. I'm not going in and be like, Kevin, you screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
And now you blew it.
Mm-hmm.
Because then that just fractures my relationship with you and you're just mad at me. And I've given you the exit to responsibility. And so, and yes, if you are an assistant principal or a dean or whatever, someone's going to RCD you when you make a mistake, and you're going to have to own your responsibility. And that's, it's a program that adults should model. If someone does lose their temper in front of other students on a kid, like they need to go back and fix it. And it might just be the next class period that you have that group. Like, I had a bad day yesterday. It's not an excuse. I lost my temper. I'm sorry that it happened. Like, kids need to see that. But the whole idea is continuous growth, continuous improvement. I'm 51. I'm an adult, but I'm not a finished product. I make mistakes. I don't do the system perfectly. I've been through the training twice. I still don't, like, in the moment, sometimes I don't go back and really connect it to the core value that I want it to be connected to. That's okay. We're all learning and growing, and that's, as long as the adults remember it, then it keeps getting better.
Absolutely. And I love what you said. We would never shortcut the learning or growth opportunities when it comes to academics. Why would we do the same thing when it comes to social emotional learning and behavior? So,
right.
Last question. Here we are at the end already. Crazy.
Okay.
But for the person out there that's looking for something different, stumbles upon responsibility centered discipline and goes, will this actually help my building? What would you say to that individual?
I mean, I could go on for 10 minutes, or I could go on for 10 seconds. Uh, the, the, the culture change is palpable over time. And kids still make mistakes. I mean, I work with kids between the ages of 10 and 15 when the brain is designed to make mistakes. Like if you go through that time period of life and don't make mistakes, you missed your opportunity, because making a mistake at 18 or 25 is embarrassing, but at 12, it's expected. But kids will still make mistakes, but their approach to dealing with mistakes is fundamentally different. And I've seen it at one school in Florida, and I expect to see it within the next few months at a school in New Jersey. Two very different populations and experiences. And the way people interact with each other is different. And there's less hostility and more focus on the process of getting to a better product. And so it is effective. If it worked for Larry in a juvenile detention center and it works for Jonathan in an independent school, I think that's the whole gamut of kids. And at the end of the day, regardless of the kid's background, socioeconomic status, religious experience, whatever, kids are kids, and they feed off of ownership, consistency, and being known. And this really hits all of those target areas. It hits all of the intrinsic learning categories that we want to hit: belonging, mastery, autonomy, bing, bing, bing. And so it's you, if you're debating what to do and you're asking, will this work? I guess my only question is what you're doing now 100% effective? And if it's not, then the worst thing you can do is say, oh, let's give something else a shot.
Absolutely. Jonathan, that's it. I know you've got to get to some lunch supervision. So I got to get out of the way of that. But thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll have you back on again. And I hope you enjoyed this first episode of RCD Roundtable, and be on the lookout for many more to come. Thank you.